Great to see so many people on the call tonight. I'm Jerry Friedman. I'm a grandma, a mom, and co-chair of ECA. We've got a fantastic evening planned, so please relax and enjoy the presentations. Tonight's webinar is in two parts. First, you'll be hearing from Bob Inglis, who I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute. And following his presentation, you'll hear from our very own elders in ECA who've created ECA chapters in their own states. We'll have a short break between the presentations, and of course, we're going to have time for questions and answers. Right now, before we get started, I'm going to turn this over to Laurel Bollinger, who's going to give you a little bit of information about navigating the screens during the webinar. So Laurel, take it away.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. So yes, we do have just a few things for you guys here. It looks like a few of you have already found it. So if you have any technical issues, please let me know by going to your chat, which is located if you bring your mouse down to the bottom of your screen, kind of towards the left of middle. Here you can type your question in the bottom section where it says type here, and then press enter or return on your keyboard. And that will send a chat to all of the panelists, and I will be able to answer any technical issues that you have. So we want to just use the chat now for technical issues. We will be having two sections of Q&A during this webinar, one after we hear from Bob, and then the other after the second half of our webinar when we hear from all of our panelists. So during both of those times, we invite you to ask us questions in our Q&A section. So the Q&A section is located to the right of middle. And to ask a question, you will also enter your question in the bottom of the box that pops up that will say, write question here. And then you press send there in the blue button towards the right. We will either answer your questions live or we will answer them by typing, replying when a type replied to you. So you can see those answers that we typed to you underneath the question that you have asked in the question box. There's two tabs at the top. Where the tab on the left, you will see all questions asked by all of the participants or the attendees. And on the right tab, you will just see your questions. So where you can check to see if your questions have been answered. So I hope you guys enjoy this webinar, and I'm going to give it back to Jerry.
Thank you so much, Laurel. I hope everybody got that. And I'd like to introduce to you Bob Inglis. He was elected to Congress in 1992, having never run for our elected office before. He represented the Greenville-Spartanburg area of South Carolina as a Republican in Congress from 1993 to 2010. Bob is the founder and executive director of Republican.org, which is a 501c3 focused on building a nationwide eco-right who believe in a free enterprise solution to climate change. Bob will talk about engaging conservatives on how free enterprise can help solve climate change faster and cheaper than big government regulations, and how it fits with conservative orthodoxy. While he was serving in Congress, he worked across the aisle, and he's now working nationwide to inspire climate solutions that will resonate with conservatives, libertarians, and pragmatists of diverse political opinion. So it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce to you Bob Inglis. Bob, take it away.
Thank you, Jerry. Thanks for the opportunity. I hope my sound is coming through. You hear me okay? Good. So first of all, I've just got to say I'm so glad to be with folks who can really make a difference on climate. And here's what I mean by that is we find that young conservatives are with us. Their parents are harder and their grandparents are hardest of all. So the fact that we have some grandparents on this call right now tells me that you are crucial to us breaking through to folks in your cohort, because Unlike you, a lot of elders are in the spot of not wanting to see much more change. Their grandchildren perhaps want to roll with the punches and get on with the change, particularly when it comes to adapting to climate change, mitigating the impacts of climate change. So it makes you very important emissaries of this message. So I'm glad to be able to share it with you. So here's what we do at republicen.org. We are conservatives reaching conservatives on climate change. We believe that the reason that conservatives haven't entered the conversation yet is there are a number of reasons, but one of them is, a key one is they haven't heard it in their own language yet. What they've heard is the language of the progressive left talking about climate change. And they haven't heard it in the language of free enterprise. And so as a result, they don't think they're welcome in the conversation. So what republicen.org exists to do is to serve it up in pretty conservative language. We like to talk about Milton Friedman, for example, the late economist who was an advisor to Ronald Reagan, and who was once asked on the Phil Donahue show, well, Dr. Friedman, if you don't want to regulate pollution, what would you do about it? And Dr. Friedman says, well, you tax it, of course. And then he goes on to explain why it is that you would tax pollution and essentially internalize negative externalities. So we talk that kind of high octane conservatism. We show clips of Milton Friedman, and we try to get people to hear it in a different way than they've heard it before. Because we believe that free enterprise really can fix climate change if we just fix the economics. And what we have here is a problem of economics that has an environmental consequence. And it is that if I'm Inglis coal-fired electricity, let's say, I get away with socializing my soot right now. It's a pretty good deal for me. I get to just sort of blow through my stack into the air a bunch of small particulates. I get to throw up there some greenhouse gases that will cause climate damages and that cause immediate health damages from those small particulates. And I'm not accountable for those. It's really pretty great for me at Inglis coal-fired electricity. Now, it stinks for my neighbors. But most of them cough it up and just move on. Some of them end up at the hospital. We end up at the hospital. We're all paying for the supposedly cheap Inglis coal-fired electricity now in the healthcare system. Because my small particulates end up in some lungs. The pulmonologists tell us that causes admissions. They show up at the emergency room or get admitted to the hospital and they're on Medicare, like my 95-year-old dad. Well, everybody in America is paying for dad. If they're like my Down syndrome niece who's on Medicaid, everybody in America is paying for her. And if that person showing up at the hospital is covered by Blue Cross and Blue Shield and your family is covered by Blue Cross and Blue Shield, you're paying. So at some point, we're going to say, people are going to say back to me, Inglis coal-fired electricity, Inglis, be even biblically accountable. Hold your ash on your property. Don't do on your property something that harms someone else's person or property. And I'm heard then to complain to the local member of Congress, oh no, that'd be a terrible idea. You know what I'd have to do? I'd have to install additional scrubbers. I'd maybe have to come up with a way to capture that CO2. Terrible idea, Mr. Congressman or Mrs. Congressman or Congresswoman, because if I have to buy that new equipment, I'm going to increase my rates. The Public Utility Commission is going to let me increase my rates. And then your constituents, my customers, are going to be powerfully mad at you because their energy rates went up. At some point, conservative members of Congress are going to say back to me, if we're successful at republicen.org, they're going to say back to me, Inglis, we're already paying the full cost of your supposedly cheap coal-fired electricity. Now, put all your cost on the meter. Let's see how you compare with solar and wind and nuclear and every other source, because those aren't necessarily getting away with socializing their soot. I'm getting away with it. They're not. That's why they need props to exist. If you take away my implicit subsidy of being able to dump into the trash dump of the sky, then it becomes a level playing field. And coal-fired electricity, may just lose to wind and solar and nuclear. That's bad for me, but it's good for the country. It's good for the whole world to have people fully accountable. Because, you know, generally what conservatives believe, and this is the messaging that we do, is that blessings flow from accountability and havoc results from the lack of accountability. Climate change is that havoc that comes from the lack of accountability. So there are problems associated with it, challenges, shall we say, associated with that idea of internalizing negative externalities. Negative externalities, as Dr. Friedman explains in that clip on Milton Friedman's show, on Phil Donahue's show, is where a cost associated with my product isn't attached to the product, it's spread out across society, unwilling participants to the transaction. So if I'm Inglis coal-fired electricity, again, my ability to dump into the trash dump of the sky is an externality. The cost, the healthcare cost, that's an externality. If I'm made accountable for that, it's a process of internalizing to my product that negative externality. The cost of my product goes up. The challenge with that is that pretty obvious that if we're going to bring that accountability through a carbon tax, which we think is a particularly good way to do it at republican.org, particularly if we apply it at the mine and at the pipeline, which is what most people are proposing if they're proposing a carbon tax. Because the beauty of that is there are only 2,000 taxpayers in America who either put stuff in a pipeline or who bring stuff up out of a coal mine. And so it's a very small job for the IRS. And so administratively quite simple. But when you put that price on, it means that now you've got a carbon tax that's, we're paying a tax. So we believe that you've got to cut taxes somewhere else in equal amount or dividend all of that money back to the taxpayers. So there's no growth of government. And so you've heard now accountability, and now you're hearing about no growth of government. These are conservative concepts. And so if you return the money through the dividend or cut taxes somewhere else, now people have money in their pocket to afford the innovation that needs to come. And what does that innovation look like? Well, it looks like solar hot water heater, probably on my roof in places across the South. It means solar cells to make electricity. It means better batteries coming. It means really a different way of powering our lives. Probably the transportation system turning to an electrified system. All kinds of exciting stuff if you're ready to innovate. And again, that's where I started this, and I'm almost to stop and see what your questions and comments are, is that for a lot of people, there's been too much change and they don't want to see any more change. And so that's why I'm particularly excited to find out from you why you're so exceptional, why you're in the category of being willing to embrace this kind of change when some of your cohort, a substantial part of your cohort, aren't willing to embrace that change. I'm going to guess, but you tell me in the Q&A time whether it's true. I think it may be because you feel that you can have an impact and that something can be better. A lot of people, I think, are stuck thinking that it can't be any better. And you know, if there's something that I can't do anything about, I've just got to accept it. If there's something I can change, then I'll do something different. So I'll give you an example. When I was a kid growing up in Bluffton, South Carolina, back then, it was a small town. Now, way too many people know where Bluffton, South Carolina is. It's near Hilton Head, South Carolina. And Hilton Head came across a bridge and spread to Bluffton. But when I was there, it was a little teeny town. And my dad drove to Savannah every day to work at Union Camp, a bag factory, made paper bags. And the plant stunk, like many paper plants. If you've ever experienced older paper plants, they really stunk. And so when the wind would blow the wrong direction, and in Bluffton it'd start stinking from the 20-mile away paper plant in Savannah, Georgia, we were taught to say, smells like bread and butter to me, smells like money. If you cooked wood chips on the top of your stove, they'd smell the same way. We had all these explanations. Most of what's coming out of the stack is steam, et cetera, et cetera. So I went off to law school, practiced law in Savannah, Georgia for 2 years. In the course of that time, I did about half of my work during those 2 years for a company called Fort Howard Paper Company, which was going to build a paper recycling mill in Effingham County, Georgia, spending $1 billion. And that was real money. Back then, still is real money. 1986, 87, 88, along in there. And so one day, their chairman and CEO was in town to check up on the progress of this new plant, a guy named Paul Sherrill. And we came down to the bank building that my law firm was in, and I was the bag carrier, literally toting the bags for my senior partner, who was talking to Mr. Sherrill, the CEO of Fort Howard. We hit the street in Savannah. Wouldn't you know it, my dad's plant was pumping out and the wind was coming from the west. So downtown Savannah was stinking really badly. So when we hit the door, Paul Sherrill said, how did they get away with that? No community in which we operate would let us do that to them. Fort Howard went on and built that plant and has no appreciable odor. Several years later, my dad's company, by the way, it's not that my dad owned the company, he was an industrial engineer there, assistant bag factory manager. It's not like he owned the place. But a couple years later, my dad's company built a plant in Eastover, South Carolina. No appreciable odor. The reality was they could have retrofitted that plant in Savannah to make it not stink. But as long as the people of Savannah were willing to suffer the stink, they'd stink them out. Because after all, fixing it meant capital outlays, meant improvements, meant costs, meant cutting into the bottom line. And so all those years, those costs were not disappearing into the air. They were being imposed on the people of Savannah. The stuff that came out of the air from my dad's plant, rusted cars. So you could have a new car that Union Camp was raining on and tearing up your car. So, or your house, the paint job was affected. All kinds of things, our health was affected. Anyway, so that's a classic case of externalizing those negative externalities, putting them on somebody else and away from your product. And so what it shows is that people could change. I mean, the Eastover plant of Union Camp doesn't smell. The Fort Howard paper plant in Effingham, Georgia doesn't smell. So for some people though, we just assume we can't change it. And so therefore we're stuck with what we've got. And when we get in that frame of mind, we deny the problem and we say we don't have a challenge of climate change because we just can't do anything about it. We got to accept what we've got. But as I stop here and start hearing your questions and comments, and I'm interested in your comments as well as your questions, I sure would love to know what makes you so exceptional that makes you willing to believe that something can be different, something can be better. Because I tell you, if I could figure out how to bottle that and get it to a lot of folks, we could win on this climate thing and we really could improve life here and around the world. So let me hear your questions and comments, and I'll tell you more about republician.org as we go along.
Thanks so much, Bob. That was great. And we do have some questions and we have some comments also. I would like to make a comment in that we don't see ourselves as being different. We see ourselves as having the same values as others. We're concerned about the future. We're concerned about future generations, our grandchildren, nothing terribly different than others and our age cohort. One of the things that I do see is that we grew up in the civil rights era, in the women's movement, in the Vietnam, and we recognize that people can make a difference, that masses of people can make change because we've seen it before. I don't see any difference in our values at all. So I don't know if that, I'll throw it to the other panelists to see what they think about it as in terms of being different. But, you know, we're elders, we've seen what has happened in the past, and we know what we want for the future for all generations and for all life. So that's, I guess, I don't know if that really addresses it too much, but that's my take on it. We've got some questions I'd like to ask of you from our people that are our participants. One of them, and I noticed from your presentation so far, what you're saying is not terribly different than what we're saying in terms of, you know, the actual facts. But, you know, you use the word tax, and that seems to make people, especially Republicans, pretty much cringe. So how would you recommend we talk with our Republican legislators when we go to meet with them one-on-one and we want them to take action on climate change? How do you recommend that we frame that to a way that they will hear it and not just shut it down as saying you're just it's just the left, it's just the liberals, it's just progressives, that, you know, it's the same playing field?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we go ahead and call it a tax because we don't think that we can hide the reality that we are talking about a carbon tax. And so if we, you know, some people prefer to call it a fee or something like that, and that's okay. But as a conservative, I think that fellow conservatives would jump on me with both feet and say, a fee by any other name is a tax, and they'd be right. And so therefore we just go ahead and call it a tax. But we say it's a tax swap, where we're going to, yes, tax something you actually want less of, and put the tax or remove a tax from something you want more of, which would be income, or dividend the money back. So it's a tax swap. It is a new tax, but there's something coming off of tax somewhere else. And so we just think that we may as well be transparent about that. As to how you interact with especially conservative legislators, I think that the way we all need to interact is with authenticity, right? And so if you're a progressive, you needn't try to become a conservative overnight, you know, and go in with, you know, a different suit of clothes and, I don't know, shorter haircut or something. You don't need to do that. But what you need to do is just be who you are. And so it's always better if you can go with somebody who's authentically part of the tribe that you're approaching. But if you can't, then go saying with respect, saying, I'm not part of your tribe, but I'm here because I respect you and I want to know what you think. Then you're talking with transparency. So for example, you know, it's best for me not to try to go to an Orthodox Jewish congregation and say, hey, bros, just like you. Because you know what they're going to say is, no, Inglis, we could tell at the door that you're not. And so probably better for me to say, I'm not like you, but I respect you very much, and that's why I'm here. So now let's talk. All the better if I had somebody who was an Orthodox Jew to go in to speak to that congregation, in which case there might be even more action. But in other words, you got to go with what you got. And so if you're a progressive and you're speaking to a conservative member of Congress, well, don't stop being a progressive, but tell them that you appreciate them and you respect them. If you're a conservative and you're talking to a conservative, then let them know that you're a conservative and part of the tribe. And so it's just, I think those are all things that we sort of learned in kindergarten, I suppose, is just respecting each other and being transparent and honest.
We've got questions for you that are coming through. One of our participants is asking, can you give some examples of how you or others have been able to convince other conservatives to recognize the seriousness of climate change?
Yeah, it's most often it's not that they get convinced of the science. It's more often they get convinced of the usefulness of the solution and the availability of a solution. And that's probably sound a little bit strange to some, because it's like, what are you talking about? They're not convinced of the problem, but they like the solution. Yeah, because we think that mostly what we're dealing with here is something called solution aversion, which is that if I don't think I've got a solution available to me that fits with my values, I doubt the existence of the problem. It's what we all do. It sounds irrational, but we all do it. So, for example, here's a plan of surgery for that back problem you're having. First, we're going to remove your head. After we get your head off, we're going to work on your spine, then we'll put your head back on. Thanks, doc, I'm feeling a lot better. I don't have a back problem, because the solution's nuts. You're not going to take my head off. And so what conservatives so far have heard about climate change, they think sounds nuts. They say, here's where conservatives heard it. The godless scientists got together with the UN bureaucrats. They looped in the Wall Street traders, and they came up with a monstrosity called cap and trade. When that didn't work, the secret Muslim non-American socialist, he's none of those things, but that's what they heard, came up with a regulatory answer called the Clean Power Plan. There's nothing in either of those two paragraphs that's attractive to a conservative. And so you just described a plan of surgery that's clearly unacceptable. And so therefore, I don't have a problem anymore. I don't have a problem with my back problem, and I don't have a climate change problem, because you don't got a solution that's going to work for me. So what we need to do is we need to show them, oh, we got a solution that actually works. It's just untax some form of income or give money back and put a tax on something you want less of. Doesn't that make sense? And then that's what moves people more often than convincing them of the reality of the science. Although I will say, it's a combination of things, right? This is a devilish problem. Getting the world to act on climate change is just a devilish problem. But there are times when people, because of a heart connection, decide to act. So, for example, one time I was speaking with a highly placed fellow in the Mormon church in Salt Lake City, and I'm sitting down in the conference room, and as literally I'm going down in the chair, he says, "You don't need to tell me about climate change." And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be a bad meeting. And then he continued, "My skis are hitting rocks." And then I knew we had him, that something in his heart, something he loved to do, which is ski, was being affected by climate change. So he was looking for a solution. And then I was able to tell him about a solution that you all shared that's basically pricing carbon dioxide. Another place that I think that it works is relationships, and this is why usually it's going the other way around. Like I say, I'm usually not speaking to elders who are committed to climate action. Typically, I'm going the other way around, which is talking to young conservatives, getting them to write a note to grandma and grandpa, telling them about why we conservatives should care about climate change. Because those relationships can open channels in the heart that make it easier for the head to understand. So in my case, by the way, I didn't tell you this story, but for 6 years, I was in Congress saying climate change is nonsense. I didn't know anything about it except that Al Gore was for it. And that was the end of the inquiry for me, because I represented a very red district in a very red state in South Carolina. And so then I was out 6 years, running for Congress again in '04. My son, who just turned 18, came to me and said, "Dad, I'll vote for you, but you're going to clean up your act on the environment." The first of a 3-step metamorphosis. Second step is going to Antarctica with the science committee and seeing the evidence in the ice core drillings. Go into that if you want to. Third step was another science committee trip and something of a spiritual awakening, which seems impossible in a godless science committee trip, but apparently they're not all godless, because this Aussie climate scientist who is showing us the impacts of coral bleaching was, I could tell, worshiping God in what he was showing me. I knew that he was. And so without any words being spoken, I knew we shared a worldview. Later, we had a chance to talk. He told me about conservation changes that he was making in his life in order to love God and love people. And I got right inspired. I wanted to be like Scott, loving God and loving people. And so I came home and introduced the Raise Wages, Cut Carbon Act of 2009. And that was one of the key things that got me tossed out of Congress in the June 2010 Republican primary. So it's these kind of, it started though, you see, with my son talking to me. And that's why I say I'm more used to it being young conservatives trying to reach their grandparents and their parents. But you all have this wonderful thing where you're reaching perhaps your children and grandchildren and fellow members of a cohort that polling data shows is not so inclined to climate action. So so together, maybe we can figure this out.
Great, thanks. That was an inspiration to us. We've got some more questions. This one from Mayim, who is asking, how can we show them, meaning the legislatures, the many solutions we could use if we're willing? You know, for instance, regenerative agriculture, et cetera. How do we demonstrate those solutions without closing doors?
Yeah, one thing is to just show them, actually get them to come out and see. You know, it's if you members of a lot of us assume that members of Congress are very inaccessible. And that's somewhat true, perhaps, if you're talking leadership. Like if you're talking the speaker, the majority leader, those people are hard to get in touch with, right? They're quite busy around the whole country. But the average member of Congress, the rank and file member of Congress, is in his or her district probably most every weekend. And so, and much of the month of August and much of the month of November and December, typically in January. So they're around. And so it's just show them. If you want to show them, for example, regenerative agriculture, ask them to come, get in touch with their office, invite them to come, maybe have the farmers that are doing it or the scientists that are working on it, get them and a group of 10 or 12 people together, and you know what? They'll come, because members of Congress are always interested in talking to groups of people. So, you know, if it's you solo, maybe they're not going to come see your regenerative agriculture thing, because, you know, that's one person at a time. That's sort of hard to do. But if you got a dozen people and you tell them that I got my neighbors, they're coming, and these people, you know, we're going to have some lemonade and we'll show you what we do here on this farm, they'll come. They won't come immediately because they got other things, but you know, plan it enough in advance and they'll come, and you'll be able to show them.
Thanks.
Great, thank you, Bob.
We have another question relating to the Citizens Climate Lobby carbon fee and dividend legislation, which sounds like you might be supportive of. Can you just clue us into that, whether you support that piece of legislation?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Citizens Climate Lobby. In fact, I'm on the advisory board, full disclosure. So, you know, they just really doing a fabulous job of organizing people, of getting people charged up about it. And there's It's really a terrific thing. So the solution that CCL and Climate Leadership Council is suggesting is, yes, a fee or a tax plus a dividend of the money back. And that's completely acceptable to us at republican.org. We're also open to, if you want to recycle the revenue from the carbon tax into a personal or payroll or corporate tax reduction, that's okay with us too. We're ecumenical as to what you do with the money once it's collected, as long as it goes back to the people. And CCL, surely that's consistent with their proposal, is to give it back in the form of a dividend. The advantage of the CCL proposal over those corresponding tax cuts that I was just mentioning is that it creates a political constituency for a steadily rising carbon tax. And in order for this to work, it needs to be a steadily rising carbon tax. Reason is, economists tell us that there's a substitution effect that will play out here. And that is, as I here in South Carolina see the true cost of coal-fired electricity, I will move away from that cost. I will try to innovate. I will turn down my thermostat in the winter and turn it up in the summer, and make it warmer in my house in the summer and cooler in the winter. I'll maybe get solar cells to my roof. I'll do things, and when I do those things, there'll be declining revenue or declining impact of that carbon tax, and so you got to have it tipped up and steadily rising. And as a conservative, as long as you're going to give me a corresponding tax cut or an increased dividend check from that larger carbon tax, what's not to like about that? And so, but it makes sense. The CCL, the strongest argument, I think, for the CCL revenue recycling into a dividend is that it creates a constituency. People like the idea of getting a larger check. So if it starts out, let's say, at $2,000 for a family of four, and it rises to $2,100, that's the right direction. People like that idea. It's sort of like the Alaska Permanent Fund. People sure do like it when that money goes, when that check goes up. So that's the strongest reason for the recycling the revenue through a dividend.
Thanks. To follow up on that, how do we counteract, this is a question from Tim, how do we counteract the House vote against a carbon tax? How do we frame a response to that?
Oh, great question. Yeah, very topical, because just last week. I was about to dismissively say we laugh at it, but I guess I shouldn't laugh at it. But it's a silly resolution, so why not laugh about it? So, like, I don't think we should take it seriously, honestly. I mean, Steve Scalise put forward this resolution that describes some villainous carbon tax that must be hiding under the bed, because I haven't seen it in anybody's proposals anywhere. It was a revenue positive carbon tax. In other words, we're going to tax carbon, we're not going to give the money back. And it was not border adjustable. It was not going to apply to the rest of the world. Well, who would be for that one? The answer, nobody. I mean, if I were still in Congress, I think I probably would have voted yes. And then sort of chuckled at Steve and said, Steve, what a joke, man. Why'd you put this resolution on the floor? That's not, nobody's talking about that kind of a carbon tax. I mean, it'd be like, and I'm against melting ice cream too. Why didn't you put that in there? And I'm against hot dogs getting cold. I'm against, I don't know, keep on going with a list of useless things to talk about. Because, and take up time on the House floor when we got serious business to do. I mean, in a way, I think we should just view it with contempt. But let me stop there, because you know why? I'm thinking there's some wonderful CCLers on the phone who know that you're not supposed to act that way. You're supposed to be nice. And that's the wonderful thing about CCL. They'd be much nicer than I'm describing. So here's how to be nice. Well, Steve, I guess we just haven't explained to you how it is that the carbon tax would work when we give all the money back and we apply it to imports. wasn't that nicer than what I was just talking about. I'm sorry, I was not very nice in what I said. So I got to learn to be nicer. I got to learn to be like CCLers. So, but honestly, the resolution was, it's a farce. I mean, there's nobody proposing that carbon tax. And so, so I think that's just the thing to point out is nobody's talking about that, such a carbon tax. Nobody wants to make it revenue positive. You know, somebody who I've been inspired by in this way is Art Laffer. Art Laffer, Ronald Reagan's economics advisor, is a neighbor of Al Gore's in Nashville, Tennessee. Art has been over to Al's house. This I've heard from Art and confirmed by Al. Art has been over to Al's house. They talked it through. They came to the conclusion that a revenue neutral, border adjustable carbon tax, which is what we're talking about here, and not what Steve Scalise was talking about, it was acceptable to both of them. Al, because he desperately wants to reduce emissions. Art, because he'd do anything to reduce a tax on income. And so, so I thought, you know, this is pretty impressive. These two people, if we can get Art Laffer and Al Gore to agree, we can bring America together. The thing that's very impressive about Art, Reagan's advisor, Art Laffer, is that he goes out of his way to protect the reputation of his literal neighbor, Al Gore, and honoring the ninth commandment. You know, there's a positive side to the ninth commandment about not bearing false witness, which is, you know, building the reputation, protecting the reputation of your neighbor. And so Art goes out of his way to protect Al Gore's reputation by saying Al has never been for a revenue positive carbon tax. It's always been revenue neutral. And so good for Art Laffer being that way and making sure to protect Al Gore, his neighbor's reputation. And that's what we all should do, is just say, listen, Steve, we're not talking about a revenue positive carbon tax.
Thank you. We have some more questions. If you have a few more minutes to answer questions.
Sure.
From one of our participants, you mentioned that the older generation is hardest to get active on climate change. Do you have any ideas on ways to communicate with the more conservative grandparent generation?
Yeah, hold on just a second. I'm going to reach down. I'm going to disappear because I got to plug this computer in. Otherwise, I'm going to go dark here. Okay, there we go. How to reach senior conservatives. I think the most effective way is through their grandchildren, actually. It really is a relationship thing. It's a matter of tribal identity. This is what it is if you, and I found this out going door to door a lot, which I did a lot when I was a member of Congress, running for Congress and when I was serving in Congress, is quite often you didn't have to wait to ask the people a question. You could just look around them at the door and see what's on the TV. And if Fox was on, you know what they were going to say. If it's MSNBC, you knew they were going to say the opposite. And so we have a real challenge on our hands, which is people are receiving news on their news island, and they're getting affirmed in whatever it is that they believe. And so when they come in contact with somebody who's listening to MSNBC or Fox, vice versa, they think they've just landed from Mars. They don't understand the people. And so one way to break through that, I think, is through the relationships of family and friendships. And that's where really the people that I'm talking to right now, people who, grandparents who do care about climate, are in a unique position to influence your compatriots, your people in your age cohort. Friends at church or synagogue, or people in the bowling league or bridge club or whatever it is that you do, and just bring it up. That's the thing. I mean, what we find out, we know from our colleagues at the Center for Climate Change Communication at George Mason University, which is where we're located, is Republic EN is part of the Center for Climate Change Communication, George Mason. What we know from their work is that people don't talk about climate. Not at Thanksgiving, not at Easter or Passover. They just don't talk about it. So we need to have people talking about it. And so bring it up when you're really the group. You are very powerful to reach your friends. And if you find a conservative, encourage them to come look at our stuff at republicen.org, or challenge them if they need to be challenged to look at our stuff. Tell them it's, if they're progressive, send them to Bill McKibben and 350.org. He's a great guy and got great stuff going on. If they're conservative and they need to be convinced, send them to our site, republicen.org.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we're running low on time. Maybe we have time for one more question. This is from Joe. So he's talking about the alternative, when you're talking about the paper factory, is the alternative to require the paper factories from stopping to pollute, but those strategies tend not to be viable because of what they're saying is a small government approach. Do you have a response to that?
Yeah, there are two very respectable views. I think one is that you could have the view that what we have here is a scientific problem. We need to get down to 350 parts per million, and we need to regulate down to that. That's a respectable position. It's not our approach at republicen.org. Our approach is, yes, we need to get down to 350. We'd like to get lower. We need to do that. But the fastest, most efficient way to do that is simply by pricing carbon dioxide, putting a price signal in effect. The good news for us in that position is I think most economists are with us. And not I think, I know most economists are with us. In fact, it's really hard to find an economist who disagrees with that notion. I once asked a very senior economist at Virginia Tech to give me the name of somebody who would disagree with that. Because I said, there must be some economist who's written the opposite of that. And he thought for a while, and then he said, nope, I can't think of any. Because he said, you know what? You can't be an economist if you don't believe in the concept of internalizing negative externalities. He said, it'd be like being a scientist and not believing in the scientific method. He said, no, it doesn't exist. It just gives me great confidence to say, there's a way to get there by this price signal. But I got to admit, what I'm expressing there is a fair amount of faith in the power of free enterprise. And not everybody shares my faith in the power of free enterprise. So some people would prefer a regulatory answer and regulate down to that. That's respectable. But if we're going to convince conservatives to act on this, it really will be a price signal. And the good news is there's so many progressives that agree with the price signal, and a growing number of conservatives could accept that. That means we can bring America together and get a price signal done. If we attempt to do it by regulation, there will be a backlash among conservatives, just like there was on Obamacare or the Clean Power Plan. So we got to figure out a way, and this again is consistent with the wonderful ethic of CCL, is some way to bring people together and to find a path forward that works for both conservatives and progressives.
Thank you. I have one last real quick question, which is probably a very easy answer for you, from David. And it's, where do you see the best opportunity to get debate going on a carbon tax? Is that in the House or the Senate? And where should we really apply our energies?
Well, as of today, it's in the House, because Carlos Curbelo has just introduced a carbon tax bill that's the first time since some fella from South Carolina introduced a carbon tax in 2009. But it's going to go better for Carlos because we're no longer in the midst of the Great Recession. The economy is much better. People have experienced climate change, and he's got a very creative idea. It's not exactly the proposal we've got. It's not exactly the CCL proposal. It's a little bit different, but at least it's the start of the conversation about climate change and a carbon tax, a pricing mechanism. And so the answer as of today would be the House and Carlos. I'd love it if some senators would introduce companion legislation in the Senate. I'd particularly love it if my friend Jeff Flake would introduce it, because when I had the bill that I was talking about in 2009, Jeff Flake was my Republican co-sponsor. And, he was attacked for being on that bill in his first Senate primary. And Jeff Flake didn't back down because I knew that Jeff Flake does not back down. He said, yes, I was on Bob Inglis's bill. It's a good bill. It's a way to deal with climate change. Next question. And so I hope that Jeff, maybe before he leaves the Senate, would introduce a companion to Carlos's bill.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Bob. I think everybody has really enjoyed this, and I thank you for listening to our questions. We'll certainly try to reach out to other grandparents and other elders. Not that we haven't been doing that thus far, but we seem not to have so far been able to really convince conservative grandparents of climate change. I think in part because what they're hearing is it's a hoax, and that's a bit of a problem for us to counteract. But I thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And right now we're going to have to close out this part of the webinar. And certainly you're welcome to stay, Bob, if you choose. We're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll be back at 7 o'clock Eastern, which is actually 6 minutes from now. We'll take that break, and then you'll be hearing from elders who have started chapters and teams in their own states or communities. People who've never done anything like this before. Some of us are retired, some of us are not, but we've never done anything like this before. And we've got elders stepping up saying it's important for future generations. It's important for our grandkids. So we're going to start chapters and do work locally and federally. So thank you so much. And we will be back at 7 o'clock. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you.
Everyone can just step away from their computer. No need to turn it off. Just leave it be, and we'll see you back at 7 or 4 o'clock.
Okay, well, that was a fantastic presentation by Bob Inglis. And we're going to start on the second part of our webinar and hear directly from our members, our ECA elders who have created chapters in their own areas. And they are people who've never done anything like this before and are stepping up and creating chapters. Before we start that, I'd like to just give you a little bit of information about Elders Climate Action, a little overview, a little background, and just show you a few slides. Next. So who are we? We are a group of elders. You see us all sitting on those steps after having a great event in Washington, D.C. last year. And we're mobilizing other elders throughout the United States to address climate change. So while there's still time to protect the well-being of our grandchildren, future generations, and all life. And if you're anything like me, the most important people on the face of the earth to me are my grandchildren. I live for my grandchildren. So who are we? Well, we are a group of elders, and we've been around a long time, but we're a very young organization. We're a project of Conscious Elders Network, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. And we were launched in 2014, actually the end of 2014. So we're just a little more than 3 years old, even though our age, if you look at us, we don't look like we're 3 years old. We're all volunteers. We've got over 5,500 members in all the states. We've got people, members in Mexico, New Zealand, Canada, United Kingdom, and India. And so we're pretty well, we've got people all over the place. We've created 5 local ECA climate action teams, and they're organized as chapters. And there's more of those to come. You're going to hear from some of those chapters in a few minutes. We've engaged with over 69 other organizations who we partner with. Some we have very, very deep collaborative agreements with. Next. So you all know that baby boomers are the largest voting bloc, and we're over 90 million strong. So our voice really counts. It counts in the voting booth because 34% of registered voters, that's a lot. And in the words of Drew Dellinger, what did you do once you knew? Next slide, please. So we've got some initiatives that we really support. You heard from Bob Inglis talking about the carbon fee and dividend legislation, either through carbon fee and dividend legislation from the Citizens Climate Lobby or other similar legislation that would put a tax on carbon. We feel very, very strongly about the EPA emissions regulations and not degrading those regulations and keeping them strong and really being supportive of the EPA in keeping all of those regulations strong. One of the other areas that we feel strongly about is fossil fuel divestment, both on an individual and a corporate level. There are some areas in the country where pension plans that are invested in fossil fuels are now divesting themselves of that. And that's a wonderful occurrence. We need to see more of that. And we support state and local policies. Why do we support state and local policies? Because it's important that we act where we are. Every state and every locality is very, very different. And the priorities for action in those states are very, very different. And an example is I live in the state of Florida. And one of the most important issues for us in Florida is sea level rise. I live 7 feet above sea level. So sea level rise is a really critical issue. I'm 12 miles inland and only 7 feet above sea level. So any rise in sea level, I would be washed out. That's not an important issue for people in Arizona to work on. They've got much more important issues that they want to work on at state level. So that's why we really support the state and local policies by the chapters, and that's the work that they will do. Next slide, please. So what are we doing? Building a movement. As I said, at local, state, and national levels, we've got local teams, state teams, and we've got a national organizing team. And we're always looking for input into that team and people to assist us in working on our national issues. Nonpartisan, and we have partnerships with a group of other organizations that are very similar to us. One of the most important things is that this is tough. This is hard work. It's emotionally hard, and we have to put out and do a lot. So we have fun and we develop new connections as we work together. And I'll show you how that is in the next one of the next slides. We've got tons of volunteer opportunities, so we can make our voice heard. We need to be strong and we need to make our voice heard. Next slide, please. So what have we done in our youth? We have had, in 2015, Grandparents Climate Action Day, where we met in Washington, D.C. for 2 days. And in that 2 days, we had a day of fantastic inspiration and education. And the next day, we met with legislators in teams and had over 45 meetings with legislators. So this was, I would say, the first time many of us had walked the halls of Congress. And so it was a very intimidating and exciting and empowering day for us. And then in 2016, we had a Congressional Candidates Climate Project, and we've had ongoing letter writing campaigns that are available through our website. in 2017, just last year, we went again to Washington, D.C. We had a day of inspiration again, a day of action. We followed that by a day of actually going, and we dropped off and delivered our message to all 535 members of Congress. On the third day, we participated as an elder contingent in the climate march, in the People's Climate March in Washington. And if you look at the top picture, you will see us in the People's Climate March performing our flash mob, which is our signature flash mob song that we perform wherever we go in small groups. And as I said, we try and have fun, and that's one of our fun things that we do. And the slide below that, you can see a picture of our Children's Trust, the youth from our Children's Trust and Frostpaw all came to our Elders Climate Action Day the day before and sang our song with us and sang the flash mob with us. And you can see us all there really having a good time while we're doing this serious work. So those are the things that we have done in the past. And I'll tell you a little about our current projects. We've got a partnership with the Environmental Voter Project. And the Environmental Voter Project is an organization which you're going to hear from in the next webinar. And we are participating with it with an Elders Vote for the Climate. And that is an ongoing project, and you'll hear more about that next webinar. We also have partnered with Dear Tomorrow for letters to our loved ones. And that is another project where we're writing letters to a loved one in 2050 about climate change, about what we hope and what we feel moving forward. Our latest action and project is the Candidates Pledge Climate Action. You'll hear a little bit about it today, and then you'll hear the true launch of that project is in our next webinar that's coming up. That project, we're asking candidates for office that are running in this election to take a pledge that they will take climate action. So there's projects that we're currently working on. You're all welcome to participate in them. And that's just a little bit of information about ECA. And now I'm going to turn it over to Steve Simon, and he's going to facilitate the second part of this. And you'll hear from teams and chapters. So it's over to you, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Jerry and Bob Inglis. That was incredibly inspiring. And Jerry, thank you so much for the introduction to ECA. In this section, you're really going to hear from 3 of our ECA chapters on how they became formed and the actions and activities they are doing to support climate activism by elders. We will be hearing from our Arizona, our Massachusetts, and our Northern California chapters. So we're going to start with Hazel Chandler from Arizona. And I just want to remind you to submit your questions as they come to you. We will have one Q&A session with all the panelists at the completion of the presentations. So I'm very pleased, of course, to introduce the miracle worker, in my judgment, Hazel Chandler. She's a member of our coordinating council and the Arizona chapter co-leader. As Hazel went through her stages of motherhood and grandparenting, she became increasingly concerned about the world that our children and grandchildren are going to inherit. Upon retiring from the nonprofits sector, she had time to act in response to this concern and felt an urgent call to act now. Hazel trained with the Al Gore Climate Reality Project, and a few weeks later found Elders Climate Action. She feels that together with other elder friends, we are writing a new story to tell our grandchildren about how we join together to demand human rights and a livable planet for future generations and all life. By the way, Hazel is also running for elected office in the Arizona House of Delegates. So welcome, Hazel.
Thank you so much. It's really a great pleasure to be with you. I'm coming from hot Phoenix. It's 112 today and headed up into record territory in the next couple days. And so we see on a daily basis the impacts of climate change, the warmer days and the even more concerning no winters and warmer evenings. When I became active in Elders Climate Action, I was really interested in starting an Arizona chapter and spent some time trying to think about how we would do that. I started reaching out to partner organizations and talking about what Elders Climate Action is doing, and participated and worked with groups such as Sierra Club, the Interfaith Power and Light, and the Care for Creation team, and most of all, the Citizens Climate Lobby. In my work with the Citizens Climate Lobby, we found out that they were sponsoring a Wild West Regional Conference here that was last fall in November. And I said, oh, this might be a good way to get a chapter going in this area. So we made arrangements with Citizens Climate Lobby to do a pre-conference to the Wild West Regional Conference. This was very successful. We had a very powerful, little small but powerful group that joined at a beautiful mountain preserve. You can kind of see in the picture behind us, the desert behind us. And we had our launch of our Arizona chapter and our first Wild West pre-conference to the Citizens Climate Lobby conference, and then participated in the full conference with Citizens Climate Lobby to learn more. In fact, we got to hear Bob Inglis' inspirational talk in person there. Out of that, we started our conversations about how do we move forward, what are our priorities. And we felt, since this was the most important election year probably we've ever faced, that we needed to get a candidate's climate pledge project going. And so Arizona chapter took the lead in this project. The climate pledge, I'm going to read it to you just so that you can get an idea of what it is. We are asking all the candidates for office at any level, at the state, at the local, at the national level to sign. And we're having really wonderful response here in Arizona to our pilot. The climate pledge says, I recognize that climate change poses a threat to the health of our citizens, our economic growth, our reputation as a world leader, and our national security. I will engage with my fellow elected officials at the local, state, and federal level to support climate legislation and regulatory policies to avoid potentially devastating social, economic, and national security impacts of climate change. I recognize that such legislation can support economic growth by stimulating technology, innovation, and development of a more resilient infrastructure, increasing domestic employment. It's a really simple pledge, and we started out by printing out copies of the pledge and taking them to our elected officials. We were going to events in our area, whether it was a forum or whether it was a debate. At those events, we asked them a question about climate change, a real simple question like, I'm a grandparent and I'm really concerned about climate change and I'd like to know where you stand on these issues. The result is, to date, When this was printed, we had 32. I think we're at 34 Arizona candidates that have now signed the ECA Climate Pledge, and more coming in every day. We have contacted every candidate for national office, both the Senate and the House. We've contacted all of our statewide candidates. We are in the process now of working to contact candidates for Arizona House and Senate, although we already have quite a few that have signed. We also have a number of local city, county candidates that have signed, as well as candidates for our corporation commission. It's really interesting when we started reaching out and going to these events in our community and asking people about climate change. We realized how much things are changing, and how many people that couldn't talk about climate change even one election ago are now just excited about signing our pledge and talking about climate change. So we've reached a place where there's a real difference in the attitude around climate change and around taking action. And I'm excited about that. We've also, as a chapter, had a lot of fun. We have participated in some community actions. We started out with a small mining group of about 5 at the Women's March, and as the day went on, we ended up with a fairly good. We picked up some extra volunteers, I should say, probably about 20 of us that were marching together with our banner. We felt it was important, and we purchased a banner for Arizona, so now we have it for future marches as well. We were a co-sponsor, and we were on all the information of the Environmental Action Day at the legislature. By the way, that was the day I decided I absolutely had to run for office. We've also attended a lot of other events and other things that are going on in the community to talk about ECA. And we've developed some really active partnerships with other environmental groups in our area, especially Citizens Climate Lobby, but also the Care for Creation team at the Catholic Church, Sierra's Club, Moms Clean Air Force. We've worked with the Interfaith Power and Light, and several other groups. This year, for the first time in a long time, Arizona is focusing on moving our state to solar and other renewable energy. There's an initiative that we collected signatures on called Clean Energy for Healthy Arizona. I am pleased to say that our group went to the Capitol when they turned in the signatures on this initiative, and they had well over double what's needed to get on the ballot, and we think that there's going to be no problem with it getting on the ballot. This will require Arizona to be 50% clean energy by 2030. It's a huge step. We should have been there a long time ago. Arizona is a perfect place for to go solar, and we should have been a leader in the world, but we're probably one of the last. But it is a step in the right direction, and I'm real excited about this, and I think we have a good opportunity to get this initiative passed. We, as an Arizona chapter, have supported this initiative. We showed up when they turned in the signatures and made some statements at that point in time, and we also have provided a written statement for the voter pamphlet that we feel that it's really important for this initiative to be passed so that our children have a livable future. So we've had a lot of fun organizing in Arizona, and we don't have meetings all the time. We just are kind of a virtual group, but we're moving in the right direction, and I'm excited about what's happened so far. Thank you. you so very much. I appreciate it.
Wow, thank you, Hazel. Your personal commitment and the activities of your chapter and actions are a true inspiration to all of us. Now, remember to submit your questions. We will address them during the Q&A session following all of the slides. So next up is our ECA Massachusetts chapter, led by the indomitable Grady McGonigal. And with him is a very active chapter member, and Mayim Barron. Grady is our engagement committee chair. He's a member of the coordinating council and the leader and founder of the Massachusetts chapter. Grady has for 30 years worked as an independent leadership consultant and coach. In 2013, he felt called to address climate change, offering pro bono consulting support to climate change advocacy groups, and then joined the Citizens Climate Lobby. In 2015, he attended Grandparents Climate Action Day, and he met up with ECA. And then he decided to join our leadership team and has founded and leads the very first ECA state chapter in Massachusetts. Grady has a PhD in education. With Grady is Mayim Barron. Mayim moved to Boston from Japan to help with her granddaughter. Shortly thereafter, she decided to step away from her profession as a Japanese translator to give more of her time to climate activism. It didn't take long to run into Grady and friends at a presentation at a senior center, and she immediately became involved with Elders Climate Action, which really fits with this phase of her life. She wants to work with people who are more or less retired, but still very concerned with the underlying issues and who have the time, energy, and expertise to give to social activism. So welcome, Grady. Welcome, Mayim.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to have this opportunity. I'd like to just spontaneously begin by responding to Bob Inglis's question earlier in the webinar about what is it that distinguishes this group of elders from other grandparents whom, as we heard, are perhaps the least receptive of the various age groups, at least in his experience. I think we all have a different story, but mine began 25 years ago when I was reading in the Boston Globe about the fate of a creature that I had grown up with in my youth in Central Texas, which was the Texas horned toad. Little boys in Texas, I think most of us would amused ourselves by chasing these creatures, tormenting them by putting them in shoeboxes, but they were famously resilient. Legend has it they could live on the desert for many decades on a drop of water. One of them was, story has it, was put in the cornerstone of a Texas townhouse in the late 19th century. Not townhouse, courthouse. And when it was torn down 100 years later, the horned toad, so here, was still alive. But despite that resiliency, the horned toad proved no match for climate change. Their numbers were rapidly disappearing, presumably in response to human activity. When I read that story, it just tore my heart out. I'm not an emotional guy, but I started sobbing. And I resolved to do something about the environment. We didn't use the language of climate change 25 years ago. And I began at that time looking for opportunities, which then expanded over the years and leading, as Steve said, to my attendance in 2015 at the Grandparents Climate Action Day conference in DC. I still remember the call I got from Paul Severance, the founder of Elders Climate Action at that time. And what appealed to me was the framing of being elderly as elders, not just getting old, but getting elder, and tapping into kind of the notion of reverence and esteem for those who are aged because of their accumulated wisdom, expertise, and so forth. So I like the idea of talking to legislators, speaking to them at the level of heart rather than head, appealing to their sense of legacy, to their concern for their children, their grandchildren. And so that took me to Washington. I really enjoyed that experience of lobbying. I was impressed with the leadership team, decided to join it, and on returning to Massachusetts, decided to convene the four of us would come from the state to that conference and see if we could start a chapter here in Massachusetts. We began meeting monthly, inviting our friends, neighbors, colleagues, anybody that we thought might respond to an appeal. And we've grown from 4 to 2.5 years later. At a recent meeting, we had 24. So a 6-fold increase. The monthly meetings have become our rhythm. We began with potluck lunch, with the gathering over food is one way of building relationships and socializing beyond the work that we do the other 2.5 hours of our meeting. We also have an active leadership team of 7 members. My aim is 1 member of the 7. We meet for an hour and a half weekly, virtually, and provide some guidance to the chapter, but we try to facilitate a democratic and very participatory organization as it grows. So as we've evolved, people have just kind of naturally gravitated towards certain niches. One person with technical skills began a website and then attracted somebody who's got communication skills to help put content on the website. That same team has started a newsletter, which now comes out monthly. Again, the technical expertise of organizing the mailing list combined with the communication skills to put it together. Another person has taken the lead on a Facebook page, somebody with a passion for social media. And still another with a background like mine in organizational consulting, in his case, meeting design, helps design, facilitate our monthly meetings and our weekly chapter leadership team meetings. So we found that the people just will naturally take on areas of passion and concern. And Mayim will tell you a little bit about how individual chapter members do that. I want to mention one other feature of our work, which is that we distinguish between chapter-wide priorities, where we try to mobilize everyone to get engaged, and then the priorities that are more individual or team-related, where maybe a subgroup will take on something. So I'd like to give one illustration of a chapter-wide priority. We have, from our outset, focused consistently on trying to influence the Massachusetts state legislature. We're blessed with a state where there is a fair amount of concern and activity around energy and climate-related issues. So last year in this, there have been bills in both houses of the legislature with significant implications for climate change. And so we've worked as part of a coalition of other climate change organizations to try to strategize to influence those legislators through calls, emails, showing up in their offices, and occasionally rallies where we demonstrate the people power that we represent. One particular piece of legislation is one we decided to specialize in sponsoring. It builds on something 10 years ago. We had something called the Global Warming Solutions Act, which put Massachusetts at the forefront of states because it committed to reducing our permanent emissions by 80% by 2050 over 1990 levels. That's a very ambitious goal. What it didn't do was specify landmarks between now and goals for 2030, 2040. So we're backing a piece of legislation that would put teeth in the original legislation in that way. And we support other priorities that are backed by other members of our coalition. So that's an overview. But the real backbone of the organization are the volunteers who come in like Mayim and who get involved not only in the the statewide priorities, but the more particular initiatives. So Mayim, over to you.
Okay, well, glad to have this opportunity to talk to you all following Grady, who was the person I met who introduced me to Elders Climate Action. You know, it was a time when I was, like most of us, I think at some point, very overwhelmed by the problem and the breadth of it. And I had gotten involved with, I've been involved with environmental causes for most of my life, but when I came back to Massachusetts, it was no pipelines and against fracking. And then I met ECA and the Massachusetts chapter, and the expertise that has come together for our chapter was so impressive. And to meet these people who had the professional background that allowed them to dig in some of the issues and really get to more of the facts about climate change and what's going on and what some of the solutions can be, it was so inspiring to meet people who could do that of course I wanted to work with them. And I felt like I really had to scramble at first to keep up with some of the information that comes through. I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels that way, but there's so much to understand about this, and working with an organization like this has really helped me get a grasp on the issues and figure out with other people what to do about them. So that was what pulled me in, and I soon got involved in the strategies that we have for influencing the state legislature, which is the main area that we feel we can work and be effective. And we find that it takes working with a coalition of the other people who are in the climate change field, like 350, or I'm not sure about the rest of the country, but Mothers Out Front is very active here. So sometimes we are not entirely in agreement with what their priorities are, but it seems to be becoming more and more clear that working together with the other climate activists is very effective, I think, when we go to talk to legislators. And one thing that I want to share with the other chapters, or maybe people who are interested in starting a new chapter, we got these green t-shirts that say, have the Elders Climate Action logo on the front, and they're this bright Kelly green. And if there's even 2 to 4 of us showing up on the State House steps, you can see our group in there. So that is a trick that we have learned that lets us be very visible to our partners in this, so that they feel like we're showing up for them. I guess our strategy is, if we show up when Mothers Out Front, or here in Massachusetts, we have a coalition called Mass Power Forward. If they're doing something and we're invited to participate and support them, if we support them, we're feeling like we'll get support back from them too, and that we have to build this broader base of people, especially a more diverse base. So how do you do that? And what do you get people involved in doing? As the slide says, if I can see it here, we do a lot to try to influence the legislator through making calls and writing letters. And we've had a very hot couple of weeks here as we're getting to the end of our legislative session. And we try not to send out too many, because you can't send out an action alert every day, as urgent as it is. And believe me, the guys on our team here, it's like, can't we take a weekend? Man, the climate won't wait. We're working on it all weekend. But we can't do that to all our members all the time. So we have to kind of be very strategic in what we do ask them to get involved in. And hopefully then they do make calls when we ask them to occasionally, like crunch time that we're in now. I think all of us are looking at how do we reach other elder groups and make presentations to them. We're in a process of reevaluating that. Who do we reach out to that has been effective? What are the most effective ways to reach out? And where are the places to find elders that are going to be active with us? I think initially we had the idea, oh, we just go to a senior center and there's lots of elders there and we'll find them. Well, yeah, there are a lot of people there playing cards or whatever, but that may not be where we find the people who are still really wanting something active to do. So we're taking a look at that, looking at, we've noticed when we go to something like a local folk festival, there's a lot of elders there who are getting out. So maybe we need to have a table there. We've used tabling. We have some materials we've developed to give out to people, but I think we're going to get hone in a little bit more on where are the best places to put our time and energy to actually meet elders that we can recruit. So what happens when you recruit them and you get people in? I think the important thing then is to really engage people. encourage people to get involved with projects that they really care about. So we have a couple that have emerged from that. And that's where people are really connecting and starting to form their own teams within the chapter that they are working together on. One project has to do with trees. Another one has to do with developing your personal narrative. And at our chapter meeting last month, we heard from a couple people who've worked with this group to develop a short speech they can give, like why they care about this. And they were so moving. We've been told it's your personal story that is going to affect legislators or other elders, but to actually put the time in and develop that story and be able to present it looks like it's going to be quite effective. So those are a couple of the projects that our members have been really into and working on. And we are trying to find other activities for members besides our monthly meeting. Once a month is not enough. We have our newsletter. We have some subgroups working, but we're looking at other kinds of, more social activities. Like we had a field trip out to an old growth forest, which in Massachusetts, we don't have the redwoods like you do in California. You have to go for quite a way to find an old growth forest and experience the difference. So that kind of feet on the ground experience, kind of like what Bob Inglis was saying about showing the Congress people, actually take them out to a farm and show them what's going on. I think we can do more of that for our members. And we have some other groups in the area that are very strong in things like regenerative agriculture. So we're looking at that kind of activity too. And then there's, the day-to-day stuff of getting our chapter out there, information. We feel like we provide a lot of information on climate change through the newsletter, which we've developed, which, as Grady said, was, from the passion of a couple people who wanted to do this. And now I think we have a pretty decent newsletter that goes out once a month to about 350 people. And I know I see one of my jobs as connecting people within the chapter. So we have some project that goes on, and I'll be right on the person who organized it. Oh, can you write something about that up for our newsletter and get us some pictures? Because that gives us more to put out to our community and the larger community. So I feel that emphasis on building community among the chapter members by finding things they can participate in right away, even if it's some small thing they can help us find out, somebody we need to figure out who's in what position we can connect with. So I try to stay alert for opportunities to find things to engage our members on, and not only the internal networking, but we also want to be an outward facing organization for these other members of the coalitions we're active in. So we need to have people who can go to those meetings and meet with those people too. It's a role I happen to enjoy a lot because I love networking, but be alert to that kind of thing for our people to do and go connect with some of these other groups. I'm very excited about developing connections with Black Lives Matter, because as we see, you go to a climate action meeting and it's going to be 90% or more white folks. And it's very hard to get the cooperation with those other people unless we invite them right in from the beginning. So we're looking towards this talk about a September 8th action and bringing them in right from the start. And I'm encouraged to see that just the few times I have met them over the last year or so, now when I ask them to come to the table to start planning this event, they responded right away and they're taking part. So I think we are making a little progress, and I'm happy about that. So that's about all I have to share with you at the moment, but happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Grady. Thank you, Mayim. Very inspirational. We'll see about getting the sound improved for the videotape that you'll get so that you can hear Grady a little better. His sound was definitely off, but we're going to try to fix that. By the way, Grady also leads our Council of Chapters, and he's there to help those interested in starting a chapter amongst other of us. So next up is our Northern California chapter, represented by two incredibly outstanding and talented individuals in Shirley McGrath and Sheila Tarbett. Shirley started her career in the Peace Corps in Colombia and has worked in numerous locales and as a trainer and in drug and alcohol education and as the patient services manager for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. She has been with the NorCal chapter leadership for several years, and for ECA at a national level, she led our ECA partnership liaison effort and expanded our partners to well over 60. Shirley, as she would say, I cannot imagine a more meaningful purpose than to alter the course of global climate change. This is an incredible opportunity for us, the older Americans, to make this our life's work. Sheila is joined by, Shirley is joined by Sheila Tarbett, who's part of the Northern California leadership, and Sheila has worked in health and human services and program development and evaluation, ensuring effective services for communities in need. She still does much consulting and volunteering. She grew passionate about addressing climate change and other environmental threats and is deeply nurtured and inspired by nature. And she just returned from Iceland doing such a trip and loves to be outside the natural world when she can. Sheila is also a key and active member of ECA's policy committee. So Sheila and Shirley and Sheila, welcome. Please join us.
All right, thanks, Steve. It is kind of hard to get those two, Shirley, Sheila. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. We are really pleased to be able to share how our chapter came to be and what we've been up to. In the year leading up to the 2016 election, there were several ECA members in our geographical area who were working on the candidates project. So when we came together in Washington, D.C. the following spring, and we met again in our geographical areas, by the time we ended that meeting, we were really very inspired and fired up to form a chapter. And we left that conference with that goal in mind, and we actually had our first meeting a year ago in June of 2017. So our mission when we left that meeting in DC was to establish a chapter, form a leadership team, and grow the membership, and to work locally with our ECA partner organizations and other climate organizations in our local areas. So that's been very, very rewarding work. Over the past year, we have, as I said, formed a leadership team and conducted monthly planning and membership meetings. To fulfill our mission, on the next slide, you'll see all of these organizations that we've met with and supported. And it's been so inspiring to see how many organizations there actually are in Northern California working on climate change. I mean, it really gives us hope that we can make a difference. And so I just really want to point out that we are so grateful to one of our members, Marilyn Price, our volunteer administrator. Marilyn helps to plan the meetings. She takes notes, she sends out agendas and meeting notes and meeting reminders, and she keeps the NorCal member roster up to date. And in addition to all of that, she wears her ECA t-shirt to all of the many, many, many organizations that her meetings. I mean, she's just incredible, and we're very grateful to her. So on the next slide, what does it mean to be a member of NorCal? We've discovered that there are many, many ways to work on behalf of the climate. this slide and the next one will show you a representative sample of what we've been doing over the last year. We have written letters supporting state bills, and we have one that's really going quickly now. It's called SB 100, and the goal of SB 100 is 100% renewable energy in California by 2045. So that is a worthy goal, and we are on board with that coalition. We have found other ways to work locally. We are helping to educate on the facts of global warming and sea level rise. And some of us in California, as you know, are experiencing climate change now. It's not something that's happening in the future. And then on the last slide, there are more examples of how we as elders are helping to raise awareness of climate change. We've contacted members of Congress, we've written letters to the editor. We've become familiar with the Drawdown Project, which you may have heard of, and all of their solutions that they have come up with. And some of us have learned how climate change has affected businesses. And one of our members has come to us and suggested that we start working with youth, an intergenerational project, which makes a lot of sense. Elders and youth, we think the relationship could be very rewarding, and we're looking forward to doing that. So we hope that you have, through this very short, very brief presentation, seen some things on the slides that will inspire you to start a chapter in your neck of the woods. So now Sheila will tell you a little bit more about our chapter. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Shirley. I'm just going to talk briefly about a couple of things. I'm going to talk about our chapter's implementation of the candidates' climate pledge, which is something that you've heard about from Hazel and some of the other speakers. So we know that influencing us, who represents us in Congress as we approach the midterms, is actually so critical and one of the most important things and gratifying things we can do. So we're forming district candidate pledge teams, beginning with our contacts with ECA and Conscious Elder Network members. In California, we have 53 congressional districts, so we have quite a bit of territory to cover. But we're beginning with contacts in 14 of those districts. And if there are any Californians out there listening who want to get involved, please let us know. We would love to have more people working with us on this. Our teams are contacting the two primary candidates in their district and arranging to meet face-to-face with them if possible. We want to form a relationship with the candidates so we can continue to work with them. We want the climate problem and potential legislation to be a visible, publicly discussed topic in each of these campaigns. As you've heard, ECA will post the names on its website of candidates who sign the climate pledge. But after a candidate signs, if they do, we encourage local teams to follow up in a couple of different ways. And I think maybe a couple of speakers referenced some of these types of things. We encourage our teams to continue to attend debates and town halls, to publicly ask the candidates where they stand, to write letters to local newspapers, and to continuously promote the idea and to support the candidates in promoting the idea that we need governmental action to deal with this threat. So it's a very gratifying process to be involved this way. The more we can do to influence the outcome of the next election the better. It's just such an important thing to do. So, okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about something else we're working on. We have planned a single-day conference for September 15th in San Francisco. This will be shortly after our Governor Jerry Brown's Climate Summit. The event is called Elders Awakened, Standing for Our Grandchildren and All of Life. It's a joint venture of the Conscious Elders Network, Elder Activists for Social Justice Group, and our Northern California ECA chapter. It's going to be at the San Francisco Unitarian Universalist group, and their environmental justice working group is going to be a co-sponsor also. So it'll be a day of interaction, music, art, and many opportunities to explore how we can each contribute to healing our world. The day is divided into two parts, and the morning will be based on Joanna Macy's interactive work that reconnects. Our CEN facilitators are really experienced, and they'll guide us in a process that's been used all over the world, inviting us to go through a cycle of experiencing gratitude and at the same time then honoring our pain for our troubled world, experiencing our relatedness to others, including past and future generations, and taking this experience, seeing ourselves and our situation in a new, different way, and going forth into wise and constructive actions. So it's a really powerful process. At lunch, we'll informally connect in small groups, and in the afternoon, our Northern California Climate Reality graduates will update us on the current state of the climate crisis. Then we'll hear from ECA chapters around the country, hopefully some of these chapters right here, and we'll self-select into some tracks where we'll be able to meet with others who are inspired to go out and act in similar ways. So tracks will include organizing new ECA chapters, the Candidates Pledge Project, intergenerational climate work, environmental justice, personal approaches to reducing our carbon footprints, and perhaps something from Project Drawdown. I know we're short on time, so I'm just going to say this is going to be a really great day, and we hope many of you out there will come, and it will be a day of connection, inspiration, and engagement. Thanks.
Thank you, Shirley and Sheila. That was really a comprehensive talk, and very much appreciated. You guys are doing amazing work. I'm going to go real quick here. We're very much out of time. We have two other chapters that are shown here, Ann Arbor and Maryland. You will all be getting a copy of the slide deck so you can read about them. And I did notice that there was a question asking whether we would send contact information and a follow-up email, and I'm sure we can do that. And really, it's important I give a little advertisement to our upcoming webinars. These are going to be amazing. The next one is August 8th with the fabulous Nathaniel Stennett. And if you have never heard him speak, you are going to be blown away. The guy is great. And he's going to talk about what our voice, our vote, why do environmentalists vote, and what impact do they have? And that'll be followed up with a talk with Hazel, Margot Frank, and Jen Chandler to introduce our Climate Pledge project. And then our last webinar is the one and only and fabulous Catherine Hayhoe, and her talk is entitled "For the Grandchildren, Future Generations in All Life." And she is about as renowned as you can get right now, one of the leading climate scientists in the world. And she's going to ask us and try to answer the question, how can we still act on climate in such a politically charged environment? Is it too late? And I'm sure Catherine will have much to say about that. Jen Chandler will then give you all the tools of our ECA Climate Action Toolkit to end the 4 webinars. Now, this Wednesday, we're going to have something we call Climate Tea and Talk, and we're hoping as many of you as you can join us. It's a casual event. It won't be in the same format as this. We can all interact. And if you're like me, your definition of tea is very liberal. So bring the drink of choice and join us and make new friends and have a good discussion. And I thank you tremendously, all of you, everybody who participated and all of the attendees. Okay, this bring up our panelists. I think we have a few minutes for questions. Is that correct? I'm not seeing much, but I do have some.
We are actually out of time. We have about 1 minute left, Steve.
Oh, okay. Then I recommend that we answer these questions by email. Is that correct? Can we do that? And deal with them in our next session, maybe on Wednesday?
You mean at the Tea and Talk?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think that's what we could do. I did want to ask the panelists about some of their challenges in getting their chapters started and how they got over those, but we can deal with that on Wednesday. So I just want to thank, since I guess we have limited time, Jen, is that correct? I just want to thank everybody who joined in tonight and all the speakers, and Bob Inglis, Jerry, and of course the 3 chapters. Thank you very much. You guys were great, and hope to see you on Wednesday. Please come back.